Hello, welcome back to my channel. Let's have a chat about the full moon in Aries that's happening on the 7th of October if you're over in Europe and Asia, Australia, and of course, for those of you in America, this full moon will be happening on the 6th of October. No matter where you live, this horoscope, and especially the rising sign horoscopes that are to follow, should hopefully give you a bit of an idea of what you can expect and maybe even give you something to reflect on in your meditation or in your journaling practices. And remember, if you need extra support, my books are open for one-on-one readings. You can always find the booking link down below in the description box. And if booking a private reading is out of your scope currently, keep in mind that I'm also doing a free reading giveaway. All you have to do is hit subscribe, and when we reach 2,000 subscribers, I will select one of you for a free reading. So this full moon in Aries is sort of like a breath of fresh air after eclipse season. I talked about this in my October monthly horoscope, which you can check out here. But in general, this full moon and October is much calmer, giving us the needed space to sort of integrate and understand everything that happened during eclipse season. It's a full moon in Aries, which means that you will be asked to consider your relationship to approaching fearful situations. Are you somebody that runs away from them, or are you somebody that gladly goes towards them, no matter how frightening they may seem? It will ask you to consider your relationship to impulsiveness. Are you somebody that is never doing anything impulsive? Everything needs to be planned and thought through. Or are you somebody that's overly impulsive, that you never think through anything before you act? This full moon in Aries will also ask you to consider what is your relationship to selfishness and looking out for yourself. Are you somebody that is always focused on yourself and never really considerate of others? Or on the other hand, are you overly considerate of others, that you don't actually care for your own needs and you're allowing others to sort of walk all over you, so to speak? And of course, this Aries full moon will also ask you to consider what is your relationship to conflict. Are you somebody that is not afraid of conflict? Maybe are you somebody that runs towards conflict and maybe creates conflict just to feel alive and to feel excited? Or on the other side of the spectrum, are you somebody that avoids it like the plague, which again is also not so healthy? And I always approach these full moon and new moon horoscopes with this idea that we all stand somewhere else on the spectrum. We might have somebody watching this video that is amazingly into their Aries energy. For them, this full moon will be about the ways that stepping too much into this impulsive, self-seeking, conflict-ready energy could also be a letdown, could also lead to some less than desirable situations. Maybe your relationships might suffer. Maybe you might end up doing an action that you realize later, crap, that was not smart to do. You need to sort of course correct. However, if we have somebody else on the other side of the spectrum that maybe is not very comfortable with this Aries energy, always avoids conflict, is always putting the needs of others first, somebody that's never doing anything impulsively, they're always thinking everything through, they will see with this full moon some of the consequences of that come about. Some situations might come about where they say, enough is enough. I need to set my boundary. I need to be selfish here. I am so sick of planning everything. I need to just do something impulsively. So always keep that in mind and always consider for yourself when you listen through these horoscopes where it is that you stand on that spectrum. And as I said, this is a fairly calm full moon, especially as we reflect back on the full moons and new moons that we had during eclipse season. However, there is one aspect that I thought it's important to mention, and it's with Mercury squaring Pluto. And as you might have noticed, especially if you've watched my channel for a bit, I almost never talk about Mercury. Mercury moves really fast, and if we were to talk about every aspect that Mercury would be making, we'd be here for a while. And I often feel like because Mercury goes quite fast, a lot of us don't notice the shifts that happen with it. Usually, if you're somebody that's more Mercury ruled, you have a Virgo or a Gemini ascendant, or, like a sun or a moon in Virgo or Gemini, you might feel the effects of Mercury a bit more. But that being said, I thought it's important to mention this Mercury square Pluto aspect because it's really one of the few challenging aspects that we have during this full moon. Actually, it's the only challenging aspect we have during this full moon. And I wanted to mention it because Aries, this energy of Aries, can already be quite impulsive, as we said. And Mercury square Pluto does show that you could be coming across some meaningful, impactful conversations. You might be either saying things to others that have a really huge, powerful impact on them, or vice versa. You might be, listening to a podcast that has a really deep impact on you, or having a conversation with a friend that does that. And I just want everybody to be quite aware, especially if you're much more comfortable with that Aries energy, not to be too impulsive with your communication. Do just think things a little bit before you go ahead and act on the impulse. The Mercury square Pluto can also show that your words might have a really powerful negative impact on others as well. They can be positive, but also negative. So just something to be aware of to keep the impulses in check for those of us that are a little bit more on the impulsive side. So now that we have the general energy of this full moon out of the way, let's get into each of the 12 zodiac signs. And for these, I usually recommend to watch them for your rising sign, also known as your ascendant, or watching it for your sun sign. You might find that's also quite applicable as well. Aries, this is your full moon. It's happening in your first house. So you might therefore find yourself quite impacted by it. And especially because it's in the first house, it will have a lot to do with how you show up. You might be asked to step into leadership positions that require for you to really, stand up, to really speak in front of others, to be the leader. It might be situations that require you to face things that feel a bit scary. You might feel like, I don't want to be the leader here. I don't want to take responsibility here. That's scary. I'm not ready for it. And you will have to face that. Remember, we talked about the spectrum in the general energy, in the general horoscope just a second ago. If you're an Aries that is struggling a bit with this energy of impulsivity, selfishness, conflict, you might also find situations coming about that really cross that boundary and really ask you to have to do something about it. Or you might also, if you're somebody that is really comfortable with the Aries energy, you might find yourself too domineering, too selfish, and you might find some of the consequences of that come back to you. Taurus, I love this full moon for you because it's happening in your spiritual house. And whenever I see this Aries energy in the 12th house, I think of what is there about spirituality that scares you, Taurus, that maybe you have not dared step into. Is there something fearful there that you need to just be ready, courageous to face? Are you perhaps avoiding some spiritual conflict? Maybe you believe in one thing, but you know that you need to stand up for it, or you need to, take a step to actually do it, and you're afraid of the conflict that might cause in your relationships. this Aries full moon will ask you to, stand up and be selfish for your spiritual needs. And of course, on the other side of the spectrum, if you're somebody that's quite comfortable with that Aries energy, maybe you have been quite forward and fearless in pursuing your spiritual side, you might also see consequences of that come about. Perhaps there are some limitations that say, okay, now it's time to step away from that Aries energy and also consider what others might need. Now might be the time to soften a little bit of that headstrong Aries energy and consider that, others might have different spiritual beliefs or spiritual needs, and try to be open to those as well. Gemini, this is definitely a friendship focused full moon for you. And depending on where you stand in that Aries spectrum, that will determine what sort of things might come up for you during this full moon. So if you're somebody that's really comfortable with that Aries energy, that maybe you have not been afraid to bring up a little bit of conflict with your friends, you're not afraid to be yourself, to stand up for what you believe in, you're maybe not even afraid to lead the crowd. When everybody's trying to decide, oh, what should we have for dinner? Oh, I don't mind, you pick. Oh, I don't mind, you pick. You're the one that says, we're going for Chinese tonight. Let's go. You're already, putting in the order. If you're somebody that's on that spectrum, you might find certain situations coming up during this full moon that challenge that a bit, that say, okay, let's try and balance that out. Let's try to consider other people's needs. You might find that, somebody really challenges you and says, well, why are you always picking what we eat? I'm going to pick tonight. So this is not cool. And then, of course, if you're on the other side of the spectrum, if you're not as comfortable with that Aries energy, certain situations might come around with your friendship group around this time where you say enough is enough. I want to look out after my own needs. I want to act a little bit more on my impulse instead of always considering what everybody else thinks before I take a step forward. And of course, because this is a relational house, Gemini, and that Mercury is squaring Pluto, be very, very mindful of the words that you share during this time. It might feel, in the heat of the moment, you blurt out everything that's on your mind, and it might feel very cathartic, but it might have a deep, deep impact on your friends. So be very mindful of that. Cancer. This full moon could potentially be quite impactful for you because it is happening in an angular house. Specifically, you could find certain situations coming around with your workplace. And it all depends what your relationship with this Aries energy is, as I mentioned in the general horoscope. If you are somebody that's quite comfortable with that Aries energy, you're not afraid to take a leadership position at your workspace, you are quite selfish, pursuing what you want and need when it comes to work, you might find that that's challenged during this full moon. Maybe somebody gives you that feedback that, hey, you're way too domineering. You need to calm down. Or something happens where you realize the impulsive decision you made was not the right one and you need to trace back, you need to apologize, you need to course correct. Or on the other hand, if you are somebody that's not as comfortable with the Aries energy, you might find that a situation comes up at your workplace that really requires you to step into it, that really says enough. I have let people step over me. I have thought way too much about what others need, and enough is enough. I want to put myself first. I want to look out for myself. It might really ask you to step into that conflict that you've been avoiding at work. Speak up and face the things that you are scared to face when it comes to your workplace. Leo. This could potentially be an interesting full moon for you. while it is not happening in an angular house, so you might not see like very tangible changes with this full moon. We're not talking about changing a job. We're not talking about, getting into a new relationship. It could have still quite a meaningful impact on you because it's happening in the house of your beliefs and your values. So it might require a little bit more of like internal reflective time so that you're actually able to notice what you're learning and the shifts that are coming about. So depending where you are on the Aries spectrum, there will be different situations that come up for you. If you're somebody that's quite comfortable with that Aries energy, you're always loud and proud about what you believe in. You are not afraid to show up to that rally or to that protest and demonstrate, stand up literally for the things you believe in. There might be situations during this full moon that ask you to bring that back into balance again. There might be a situation where you see the impact that your loud demonstration of your beliefs and values has on somebody else. And it might make you see how it's also good to be open-minded and to allow for things to be more than just black and white. Or Leo, if you're on the other side of the spectrum, if you're somebody that is not as comfortable with that Aries energy, what you might find during this full moon is that somebody keeps challenging your beliefs, stepping over your values, and you need to face them. You need to face that conflict. You need to have courage and speak up and make sure that you're looking out for yourself and your values. Virgo. This full moon is all about vulnerability and intimacy and how you approach conflict in those two areas. If you're somebody that's been avoiding conflict, you've been thinking, okay, yeah, I want to talk to my partner about this or that, but it's not really needed. During this full moon, it might come to a point where you can no longer avoid it. You do need to face this fear and you do need to perhaps have some conflict and talk about intimacy, talk about more vulnerable aspects of your life with your partner. On the other side, if you're somebody that's quite comfortable with that Aries energy, you tell your partner left, right, and center, I need this and I need this. This is what makes me feel intimate and connected to you. Then there might be some situations that come around during this full moon that ask you to step in the other direction, that ask you to consider the needs of the other person, that ask you to be perhaps a little bit less impulsive, a little bit less conflict driven, and just to slow down and think about the others before moving forward. Libra, this full moon is happening in your 7th house, so you'll probably see quite a few impactful situations come about when it comes to your relationship. If you're somebody that is not afraid of conflict in your relationship, you might find during this full moon that that's a bit challenged, that your partner says enough is enough. We're always looking out for your needs and your wants, and I'm also part of this relationship. I also want this or that. It could also be on the other side of the spectrum. If you are somebody that is not comfortable with that Aries energy, you are somebody that avoids conflict, that perhaps agrees with your partner on doing something, whereas inside you're saying, oh, I don't really want to do this. Then during this full moon, it might come to sort of a boiling point or a crescendo where you have to speak up. It gets to the point where you can no longer ignore it, and you might need to initiate a bit of conflict, initiate a bit of this impulsive standing up for yourself Aries energy. Scorpio. This could be quite an interesting full moon for you. And I say that because it will have an impact on your health and your day-to-day routine, something that is literally such a huge part of our life. And you will probably notice that it changes something for you there. If you're somebody that is quite comfortable with this Aries energy, you might find that you are spending your day-to-day life acting quite impulsively. You don't have necessarily like a routine, or you haven't thought about how you do things. You're just reacting. You're just, oh, okay, now my child wants to be fed. Oh, okay, now I have to rush out the door. Oh, okay, now my phone is ringing. I have to answer. If that's how you approach your day-to-day routine and your health, you might find situations come around in this full moon that ask you to find that balance again. Perhaps it gets so unbearable, way too fast, way too responsive, impulsive, that you have to take a step back, take a moment, reflect, regroup, and try and find and incorporate a little bit of that peace and balance in your day-to-day life. You might find yourself going off to that garden or going off to that art museum in the middle of all of that chaos. Or on the other side of the spectrum, could be that you are not so comfortable with that Aries energy. You are always avoiding conflict in your day-to-day life. You are not impulsive enough. You're letting things slide. You will find situations come around in this full moon that you can't avoid that anymore. It's like the pot overboils, and you avoiding that conflict ends up having a huge explosive impact on your routine. So again, Scorpio, it's always about finding that balance in terms of your day-to-day routine. Are you avoiding conflict? Are you too impulsive, too quick moving? Or do you also remember to find moments of stillness, moments of consideration for others, moments of peacefulness? Sagittarius, this Aries full moon will ask you to consider your relationship to instant gratification. If you're somebody that's quite comfortable with that Aries energy, you are also probably quite comfortable with being impulsive. I want that latte, I'm gonna get it. I want to go on that date or kiss that person, I'm gonna go for it. It's all about the want. It's all about looking after your own needs, and it's acting impulsively on the ideas or feelings that you might have. So if you're somebody that behaves in that way, you will probably find during this full moon that you're asked to find that balance again. A situation comes around that forces you to see the consequence of your impulsive action. A situation comes around that forces you to take a step back, to reflect, to take a moment of peace, and reflect on not just what do I want right now, but what impact is that going to have on me and on those around me beyond this current moment. Vice versa, if you're somebody that is not very comfortable with the Aries energy, you will have a situation come around that forces you to act now, that forces you to think about the current implications of things. That says, if you do not speak right now, this will really have an impact on your current situation. So you probably are usually the one that thinks about, okay, I don't have to speak around about this right now. Because I know that in the end, this is the future goal that I desire, and actually not speaking up will help me get there in an easier way, in a quicker way. But something will happen during this full moon that makes you realize, even if I don't speak up, even if that's the better choice, because it will impact my relationship less severely, it will help me achieve my future goals, it gets to a point where you realize the way it's harming me today, the way it's making me not enjoy the current moment, is worthy enough of me to say something, is worthy enough of me to speak up for myself and to face some potential conflict. Capricorn, this could potentially be an impactful full moon for you because it is happening in an angular house, and specifically your house of your home and your family. if you are somebody quite comfortable with that Aries energy, perhaps you're not afraid to face conflict with your family, you're not afraid to be yourself, to put your needs first, you might find yourself seeing the consequences of that around this full moon. Whether it's you taking a wrong step and needing to retrace back, apologize, sort of remedy the situation that you may have caused with your impulsiveness. Or it might be that one of your family members speaks up about your selfishness, how you're always looking out for yourself, and how they feel like maybe you don't care as deeply about them. You will see the consequences of that strong, head first, me first Aries energy. Of course, on the other side of the spectrum, if you're somebody that's not as comfortable with the Aries energy, perhaps you have been letting your family step all over you, been letting your boundaries slide. You are always looking out for them. You're not acting on your impulse, and you're not looking out for your own needs and wants. There will most likely be a situation where it crosses your boundary and you say, enough is enough. I need to speak up. I need to face this conflict. I need to stand up for myself. And again, remember, Mercury is square Pluto, and this is a relational house. So be very, very mindful of, in that impulsive moment, if you do need to speak your mind in the heat of the moment, be mindful as you can of what you say, because your words could have a really, really significant impact on those who hear them. Aquarius, this could potentially be an interesting full moon for you because it's all about communication and taking on that fiery Aries energy in your communication, in the words that you share. If you communicate in other ways, such as painting, writing, teaching, in those areas as well. And of course, Aquarius, as I've been telling all of the zodiac signs in this horoscope, it all really depends on what your relationship with that fiery, impulsive, selfish Aries energy is. If you're somebody that's quite comfortable with that energy, you're not afraid to speak your mind, you're not afraid to tell it like it is, you're not afraid to blurt out exactly what you're thinking, then during this full moon, you will see some consequences come out ahead of that. Perhaps you say something impulsively like you always do, and you find that it has a really negative impact on somebody, and you need to course correct and you need to adjust for what you have said. On the other hand, if you are somebody that is not as comfortable with that Aries energy, you might be put in a situation during this full moon where you really do have to speak your mind. You have to be courageous, even though you might be afraid to say what you actually think. And then you might indeed have to express it. You might have to set that boundary and speak your mind. Pisces, this full moon might have an impact on your finances. If you are somebody that's quite comfortable with that Aries energy, perhaps you spend quite impulsively, or you're not afraid to spend money on things that are just for you, things that make you happy, things that you want. You might find yourself in situations that challenge that, situations where, you know, somebody that you love and that you really deeply care about comes to you and asks for financial support, and you really want to help them, but you realize that there's nothing left over because you had spent it all on yourself. Or on the other side of the spectrum, if you are somebody that is not as comfortable with that Aries energy, perhaps you never spend money on yourself. You always think over what you're going to spend on, or maybe you are always spending money on others, but never on yourself. There might be a situation around this full moon where maybe that becomes abused, forcing you to say, okay, enough is enough. I need to set some boundaries here. I need to ensure that I also take care of my own financial needs instead of only taking care of others. So those are the horoscopes for the 12 zodiac signs for this Aries full moon happening on October 6th or 7th, depending on where in the world you live. I hope you enjoy this full moon, and I hope it's easier for you than the crazy eclipse season that we just went through. Let me know down below if any of this resonates with you. And remember that I am giving away a free reading, and all you have to do is hit subscribe. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you again soon.